My name is Clara. I am 31 years old. And just 3 days after I buried my father, while sitting in my gynecologist's waiting room with surgical stitches still fresh and aching from a sudden miscarriage, my stepbrother slapped me across the face so hard I hit the cold tile floor. "Choose how you pay or get out," he screamed at me. He didn't care that I was bleeding. He didn't care that I had just lost my baby. He only cared about the fraudulent inheritance papers he had just thrown into my lap, demanding I sign away my entire life. He thought he could publicly humiliate me and steal my father's real estate empire, leaving me with absolutely nothing. But there is one thing he and his mother didn't know. They didn't know I already possessed the key to a secret basement safe that held his literal death sentence. And right now, as I speak to you today, he is rotting in a federal prison cell, begging his lawyer for a reduced sentence that he is never, ever going to get. Before I tell you exactly how I put him there, hit that like button if you believe in real justice. And don't forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Now, let's go back to the moment everything shattered. I didn't feel the sting of the slap at first. I only felt the brutal shock of the impact and the freezing, hard tiles of the waiting room floor pressing against my cheek. Then came the taste. Warm, metallic copper blood filled my mouth. I was at my doctor's office, a place that was supposed to be safe, a place where I was trying to heal from the most traumatic week of my entire life. But my stepbrother, Arthur, had tracked me down and turned it into a crime scene. He stood over me, his chest heaving under his expensive tailored suit, his face twisted into something ugly, dark, and red. He pointed a shaking finger right at my face. "You better start listening to me," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the sterile white walls. "You sign those papers now, Clara. Or I will make sure you don't have a dime left to pay for those medical bills." The room had gone dead silent. The other patients, women waiting for routine checkups, some holding their pregnant bellies protectively, stared at us in absolute, pure horror. A receptionist behind the glass partition was already shouting frantically into a phone, her hands trembling as she dialed 911. Arthur didn't even notice them. He was utterly consumed by his own greed. He wanted to finalize the theft of my father's life work, and he was willing to assault a grieving woman in broad daylight to get it. I spat blood onto the floor, pushing myself up onto my elbows. I looked up at him through my messy hair. He really thought he had broken me. He thought I would pick up that pen and sign away my inheritance because I was scared and alone. But as I lay there, humiliated, bruised, and bleeding in front of strangers, the fear completely evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, razor-sharp clarity. I wasn't going to sign. He had made a fatal mistake by putting his hands on me. When the police arrived 5 minutes later, Arthur's entire demeanor shifted. The monster vanished, and suddenly he was the concerned, affluent citizen. He adjusted his tie and put on a mask of deep, brotherly sorrow. Officer Miller, a young cop who looked entirely out of his depth, pulled out a notepad. "She's my sister," Arthur lied smoothly, his voice dripping with fake empathy. "It's a family dispute. She's completely hysterical, officer. She just went through a terrible divorce, and she just had a miscarriage. She's not in her right mind. She tripped and fell." "He hit me," I said, my voice raw, struggling to stand as a kind nurse wrapped an arm around my waist. "He assaulted me to force me to sign a legal document." Officer Miller looked at my swollen lip, then at the red handprint blooming across my cheek. But then he looked at Arthur's custom suit and the gold watch on his wrist. "It's a misdemeanor, ma'am," the officer mumbled, looking uncomfortable. "Unless he has priors, it's just a domestic disturbance. We'll take him down to the station, but he'll likely make bail in a few hours." Watching Arthur get marched out of the clinic in handcuffs gave me a brief, fleeting surge of satisfaction, but it died the second the officer spoke. A slap on the wrist. That's all it was to them. I went into the clinic's restroom to clean myself up. I gripped the edges of the sink until my knuckles turned white, staring at my reflection. My lip was split open. My cheek was a deep, mottled purple. I looked like a victim. I looked like prey. But I wasn't prey. And this wasn't just a family dispute over a petty grievance. This was a calculated, vicious takeover. To understand why Arthur was desperate enough to hit me in public, to understand the sheer magnitude of the betrayal, you have to go back 3 days. You have to understand that before Arthur ever raised his hand, his mother had already plunged a knife straight into my back. It all started with the funeral. My father, Thomas, was a good man. The kind of man who built his real estate and construction empire from nothing but a single pickup truck, a toolbox, and a relentless work ethic. He always smelled faintly of sawdust, old blueprints, and peppermint. He was my rock, especially over the last year. My divorce had been finalized 6 months prior. My ex-husband wanted absolute freedom. He took his share of our savings, abandoned the life we built, and ran. When I found out I was pregnant shortly after he left, I was terrified, but my dad was overjoyed. He told me that we would raise this baby together, that my child would have a beautiful life. Then, Dad died of a sudden, massive heart attack. My world simply stopped spinning. The funeral was held on a Tuesday. It was pouring rain, the kind of heavy, relentless downpour that soaks right through to your bones. It felt like the sky was crying right along with me, because I didn't have any tears left. I stood by the graveside, feeling completely numb, wearing a black dress that felt too tight around my slightly rounded stomach. I was 14 weeks pregnant, standing next to Evelyn, my stepmother. Evelyn had been married to my dad for 5 years. She was a beautiful woman in a sharp, incredibly cold way. That day, she wore a black lace veil and a designer dress that probably cost more than my entire yearly salary. She was sobbing loudly, putting on an Oscar-worthy performance, dabbing at perfectly dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. "Oh, Thomas," she wailed, leaning heavily against the polished casket. "Don't leave me alone." I looked at her hands. They weren't shaking. She was gripping her designer purse so tightly her knuckles were white, as if she was afraid someone would snatch her credit cards. On her other side stood Arthur, her son from a previous marriage. He was 34, arrogant, and thoroughly bored. During the eulogy, he kept pulling out his phone, shielding the screen with his hand to check his stock portfolio, completely disrespecting the man who had paid for his extravagant lifestyle. I wanted to scream at them. I wanted to demand they show some respect. But before I could speak, a sharp, twisting cramp ripped through my lower belly. I gasped, doubling over slightly and pressing a hand to my stomach. "You okay, Clara?" Arthur asked. He didn't sound concerned. He sounded severely annoyed that I was causing a distraction. "I'm fine," I whispered, lying to myself. "Just a cramp." But it wasn't just a cramp. It was a vicious, tearing pain that took the breath right out of my lungs. By the time we were ushered into the dark leather interior of the funeral limousine to head to the wake, I was sweating profusely. My vision was blurring at the edges. "Can we stop?" I begged the driver, my voice trembling. "I feel sick. Something is wrong." Evelyn rolled her eyes, letting out a loud, dramatic sigh. "Really, Clara? Today is not about you. Pull it together. We have important guests waiting at the estate." Then, I felt the wetness. I looked down at the seat. Blood. Blind panic seized my chest, squeezing my heart tight. "Stop the car!" I screamed, the polite facade shattering completely. "Take me to the hospital right now." Arthur looked at the blood pooling on the leather and wrinkled his nose in profound disgust. "Jesus, Clara. That's disgusting. You're ruining the upholstery." They directed the driver to drop me at the emergency room entrance. They didn't come inside. They didn't even wait to see if I could walk. Evelyn simply stated they had to host the wake, and the black limousine pulled away into the rain, leaving me standing on the curb, clutching my stomach, entirely alone. The next 6 hours were a nightmare blur of blinding white lights, cold medical instruments, and hushed voices. Dr. Julian, a kind-eyed emergency physician, held my hand as they performed the ultrasound. The room was deafeningly silent. There was no heartbeat. I had lost my father on Friday, and I lost my baby on Tuesday. They rushed me into surgery for an emergency procedure. I woke up hours later in a sterile room, feeling completely hollowed out, like someone had reached inside my chest and scooped out everything that made me human. I checked my phone. Not a single text from Evelyn. Not a single call from Arthur. Just an automated email from my bank about my salary deposit. I took a taxi home the next morning. I couldn't bear to go back to my empty apartment, so I went to my dad's house. It was a massive, beautiful Victorian estate on a hill, the only place left in the world that still felt safe. I unlocked the front door, my body aching, the surgical stitches pulling tight with every step. I expected silence. Instead, I heard the loud, rumbling engine of a commercial moving truck parked in the driveway. I walked into the grand foyer and stopped dead in my tracks. Two men in blue jumpsuits were carrying my father's favorite antique grandfather clock out the front door. The house was being stripped bare. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Stop. Put that down. What are you doing?" I moved toward them, but Arthur stepped out from the dining room, holding a cup of artisan coffee. Evelyn was right behind him, wearing a casual cashmere tracksuit, holding a clipboard. "Oh, you're alive. Good," Evelyn said casually, checking something off her list. "We need you to move your car out of the driveway. The movers need more space for the dining table." "What are you doing?" I demanded, my hands shaking. "Dad's only been gone for a few days. You can't sell his things. This is our home." It was Thomas's home, Evelyn corrected smoothly, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She reached into her designer bag and pulled out a thick, legally bound document. "And now it is entirely mine to do with as I please. Liquidating the assets is the smart financial move." She shoved the paper into my chest. I opened it, my eyes struggling to focus on the dense legal jargon. Last will and testament of Thomas. And there, highlighted in glaring ink, was the clause that made my blood run cold. I leave my entire estate, including all real estate, bank accounts, and the corporate holdings, to my beloved wife, Evelyn. To my daughter, Clara, I leave nothing, as she has chosen her own path. "This is a lie," I whispered, looking up at her smug face. "This is a forged document. Dad told me just last month that the business was being transferred to a trust for me and the baby. He wouldn't do this." Arthur laughed. It was a harsh, mocking sound. "People change their minds, Clara. Thomas realized you weren't cut out for the corporate world. You're too emotional. Look at you. You're a total mess. You can't even hold a marriage together." Tears of pure, blinding rage pricked my eyes. "The signature is shaky. This isn't real. You are stealing from him." Arthur stepped forward, closing the distance between us until he was looming over me. He jabbed a hard finger into my shoulder. "Don't make a scene, Clara. We are the executors. We have the legal paperwork. We have the high-powered lawyers. You have a depleted bank account and a dead baby. Leave the business to the adults." The sheer cruelty of his words hit me harder than a physical blow. He was using my most intimate, devastating grief as a weapon to break my spirit. I lunged forward, trying to grab the clipboard from Evelyn's hands, but Arthur shoved me hard. I stumbled backward, my fresh stitches tearing painfully as I crashed onto the porch steps. "Get off my property," Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "Before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." I sat on the cold stone steps, gasping for air, the physical and emotional pain wrapping around my throat like a vice. They were predators. They had waited for my father to die, and the second he was in the ground, they pounced. I dragged myself to my car and drove away, tears blurring my vision. But the tears didn't last long. By the time I reached my side of town, the despair had hardened into a solid, unbreakable core of fury. I thought I could go home, rest, and figure out how to hire a lawyer to contest the will. I thought the worst was over. I was so incredibly wrong. I drove to my apartment complex, a quiet, modest building where I had lived since my divorce. My body felt like it was made of lead. All I wanted was to lie in my own bed, put an ice pack on my stomach, and sleep for a week. I dragged myself up the 2 flights of stairs and pulled my keys from my purse. I slid the key into the deadbolt. It wouldn't turn. I frowned, jiggling the metal, thinking maybe my hands were just shaking too much. Nothing. The lock mechanism was completely different. I stepped back, confused, and that's when I saw the bright yellow paper taped at eye level on my door. Evidence of eviction and lease termination. I stared at it, my brain refusing to process the words. Violation of HOA policies. Disruptive behavior. Immediate termination. What? I whispered out loud. I paid my rent on time through autopay every single month. I never had a party. I was a ghost in this building. From down in the parking lot, I heard the sharp, arrogant beep of a car horn. I looked over the railing. Sitting perfectly parked in the fire lane was a sleek, silver Porsche convertible. Evelyn was sitting in the driver's seat, wearing large designer sunglasses, the roof down despite the chill in the air. She looked up at me and gave a little, mocking wave. I didn't even think. I sprinted down the stairs, ignoring the sharp, stabbing pain in my abdomen. What did you do? I screamed across the asphalt. What did you do to my apartment? Evelyn lowered her sunglasses, her lips curved into a wicked, satisfied smirk. Oh, hello, Clara. Having a rough day? Did you know that the owner of this building, Marcus, is a very, very dear friend of mine? We're partners in a few real estate ventures. My stomach dropped. Marcus. The shadowy landlord I had only ever dealt with through emails. I was just having a lovely lunch with Marcus, Evelyn continued, her tone conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. And I happened to mention your severe financial troubles, your messy divorce, and, of course, the rumors of your substance abuse. Substance abuse? I yelled, my voice echoing off the brick walls of the complex. I don't use drugs. That is a complete lie, and you know it. Well, Marcus decided it was a massive liability, she said, checking her flawless manicure. He expedited the eviction clause for the safety of the community. It's totally legal, darling. Check the fine print of your lease. You really should read things before you sign them. You can't do this. Where is my stuff? My furniture? My clothes? Evelyn pointed a manicured finger toward the back alley of the complex, near the industrial waste bins. We did you a favor and helped you pack. Have a nice life, Clara. Consider this your final warning to walk away. She rolled up the tinted window, the Porsche engine roaring to life, and sped out of the complex. I ran to the back alley. The smell of garbage hit me first. And then I saw it. There, sitting in the mud and the grime next to the overflowing dumpsters, was my entire life. My clothes had been stuffed into cheap black trash bags. Several of them had ripped open, spilling my sweaters and jeans directly onto the wet, filthy asphalt. My small television was thrown face down, the screen spider-webbed with cracks. I fell to my knees in the dirt. I didn't care about the clothes. I didn't care about the TV or the cheap IKEA furniture. I started frantically tearing through the ripped bags, my hands covered in mud and grime. The box, I kept muttering, my breathing turning into shallow, panicked gasps. Where's the box? I was looking for a small, handcrafted wooden jewelry box. It wasn't filled with diamonds or Rolex watches. It held things that had zero financial value, but meant the entire world to me. It held my late mother's faux pearl necklace, her favorite silver locket with a picture of me as a baby, and the hospital bracelet from the day I was born. It was the only piece of my history I had left. I ripped open a third bag, kitchen utensils clattering onto the ground. And then I saw it. Lying near the curb, half submerged in a puddle. The wood was completely splintered. The delicate hinges were bent backward. The lid had been intentionally, forcefully stomped on by a heavy boot. I crawled over to it, my hands shaking so violently I could barely pick it up. The box was empty. I looked frantically around the puddle. Glinting in the mud, scattered across a 5-foot radius, were tiny white spheres. The faux pearl necklace. They hadn't just thrown it away. They had taken the time to snap the string and scatter the pearls into the dirt. I picked one up. It was caked in mud. I picked up another. At that moment, The devastating reality of my situation crushed me. They weren't just executing a hostile takeover of my father's business. They weren't just stealing money or real estate. They were trying to completely erase my existence. They wanted to destroy every comfort, every memory, every safe harbor I had, until I was so broken, so destitute, and so desperate that I would crawl back to them and sign away my rights just to survive. I sat in the mud for a long time, holding the broken, dirty pearls in my palm. The physical pain from my surgery throbbed in rhythm with my heartbeat. I was homeless. I was broke. My child was gone. My father was gone. But as I sat there in the filth, a memory of my dad surfaced. I remembered standing on a dusty construction site with him when I was a teenager. A corrupt contractor had tried to intimidate him into signing off on cheap, dangerous materials. Dad had fired the man on the spot, looking him dead in the eye. He turned to me and said, "Clara, integrity is the most expensive thing you will ever own. When someone tries to cheat you, you don't back down. You dig in. You dig in." I wiped the tears from my face, smearing mud across my cheeks. I carefully placed the few pearls I could find into my coat pocket. I grabbed one intact trash bag containing a few changes of clothes, and I walked away from the rest. I didn't need furniture. I didn't need a TV. I needed a war room, and I needed the one person in this city who was as tough, as loyal, and as unbribable as my father. I got into my car and drove straight to the suburbs, pulling up to a neat, unassuming brick house with a meticulously manicured lawn. The home of Beatrice. Beatrice was 70 years old, stood 5'2", and had been my father's brilliant, no-nonsense head accountant for over 30 years before retiring. She was the only person Evelyn had never been able to charm, manipulate, or intimidate. I knocked on her door. It was well past dark. The porch light flicked on, and the heavy oak door creaked open. Beatrice stood there in a floral cardigan, holding a mug of herbal tea. She took one look at my pale, tear-stained face, my mud-covered clothes, and the way I was holding my stomach. She didn't gasp. She didn't ask silly, panicked questions. Her eyes hardened into twin chips of flint. She stepped aside, opening the door wide. "Get in here," Beatrice said, her voice like gravel. "And tell me exactly which one of those bastards did this to you, because I'm going to ruin their lives." I knew right then I wasn't just going to survive this. I was going to burn Evelyn and Arthur's stolen empire straight to the ground. But to do that, I had to step directly into the eye of the storm. Beatrice's house smelled like cinnamon and old, bound ledgers. She sat me down at her kitchen table, handed me a mug of hot tea, and listened in absolute silence as I laid out the entire nightmare. The fake will, the eviction, Marcus, the pearls, the physical assault. When I finished, Beatrice placed her mug on the table with a sharp, decisive thud. "That will is garbage," she stated flatly. Thomas would have sooner set his entire real estate portfolio on fire than leave the controlling shares to Evelyn. He knew exactly what she was. A leech. "But they have the paperwork, B," I said, my voice exhausted. "It's notarized. It looks completely legitimate. How do we fight a team of corporate lawyers with nothing?" A slow, wicked smile spread across Beatrice's wrinkled face. "Clara, honey, I built the digital accounting infrastructure for your father's company from the ground up in 1998. I have a backdoor administrative key that God himself couldn't lock me out of. Let's go see what that idiot Arthur has been up to." We moved into her small home office. It was dominated by a bulky, vintage desktop computer that looked like a relic, but Beatrice's fingers flew across the keyboard with lethal precision. The screen flickered, bypassing security protocols, and, suddenly, the entire financial lifeblood of my father's company filled the monitor. Spreadsheets, wire transfers, offshore accounts. We sat there for hours, tracking the digital footprints. Around 2 a.m., Beatrice hit the jackpot. "Look at this," she pointed a crooked, arthritic finger at the screen. "Vendor payments to VW Consulting. $5,000 a month for a retainer. Then, 6 months ago, it jumps to $50,000. Last month, right before your dad died, $200,000 was wired out. Who is VW Consulting? I asked, leaning in, my heart beginning to race. Beatrice clicked through a maze of tax ID records. Registered to a P.O. box in Nevada. The sole proprietor is Arthur Vance. He's been systematically embezzling corporate funds, draining the operational accounts, and, oh my God, Clara. He's been draining the employee 401k pension funds too. It's federal fraud on a massive scale. My blood ran cold, followed instantly by a surge of pure adrenaline. Did Dad know? He figured it out, Beatrice said grimly. She opened my father's archived email server and clicked on a folder marked drafts. There was an email addressed to Robert, the company's senior legal counsel, dated just 2 days before my father's fatal heart attack. Robert, I need to see you Monday morning. I found something rotting in the books. Arthur is stealing. I am finalizing the new trust documents for Clara to cut Evelyn and Arthur out completely. I think they know I'm onto them. I think I am in serious danger. The words hit me like a physical punch. I think I am in serious danger. He knew. My dad knew they were coming for him, and they silenced him before he could reach his lawyer. We need to take this to the police, I whispered, the reality of murder settling into the room. Digital drafts and spreadsheets are circumstantial, Beatrice warned. A good lawyer will say Arthur was just a bad businessman and Thomas was paranoid. We need the actual, signed trust documents. We need hard, physical proof. Where would he put it? I asked. Beatrice looked at me. Thomas had a real safe. Not the decorative wall safe Evelyn uses for her jewelry. He installed a heavy-duty, concrete-embedded drop safe in the basement of the old house 5 years ago, hidden behind the main water heater. He gave me the combination in case of a catastrophic emergency. If he signed those new papers, they're in that safe. They changed the locks on the house, I said, my mind racing. And Evelyn's security system is state-of-the-art. The front doors, yes, I muttered, a crazy, desperate plan forming in my head. But there's an old, rusted coal chute window on the side of the basement. The latch broke a decade ago. Dad never fixed it because he thought it was too small for anyone to ever squeeze through. The next night, I found myself crouched in the damp bushes outside my childhood home. Beatrice was parked 2 blocks away in her sedan, the engine running. The house was pitch black. Evelyn and Arthur were staying at a luxury hotel downtown while the house was being prepped for sale. I wore dark clothes, moving silently toward the basement window well. I cleared away years of dead leaves and found the heavy iron cover of the coal chute. I pushed. It groaned, metal grinding against metal, but it swung inward. I slid into the tight, claustrophobic hole feet first. The rough concrete scraped violently against my back. As I dropped, my stomach caught the ledge, and a blinding flash of agony ripped through my surgical stitches. I bit down on my sleeve to muffle a scream, tasting copper again. I couldn't stop. I dropped onto the dusty concrete floor of the basement, clicking on a small pen light. The basement smelled of damp earth and sawdust. I navigated past stacks of old holiday decorations until I reached the massive, industrial water heater in the corner. I squeezed behind the hot metal tank, running my hands over the brick foundation. Just as Beatrice said, one brick felt slightly loose. I shimmied it out, revealing the cold, gray steel dial of a hidden safe. Right to 4. Left to 15. Right to 88. My birthday. Click. The heavy handle turned smoothly. I pulled the door open, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the flashlight. Inside was a thick manila envelope and a small, orange prescription pill bottle. I opened the envelope. Last will and testament of Thomas. It was dated 3 days before his death, fully notarized with a raised seal. I leave 100% of my corporate holdings, real estate, and personal assets to my daughter, Clara. Evelyn and Arthur are to receive absolutely nothing. Tears streamed down my face. He had done it. He had protected me. I grabbed the pill bottle next. The label read digoxin, my dad's standard heart medication. But when I shook it, the pills inside looked wrong. They were chalky, slightly different shapes, not the uniform pharmaceutical-grade pills he usually took. I shoved the envelope and the bottle deep into my jacket, gritted my teeth against the searing pain in my abdomen, and pulled myself back out through the chute. The next morning, Beatrice and I walked into the plush, mahogany-lined office of Robert, the company's senior attorney. When Robert saw my bruised, battered face, he immediately looked away, ashamed. He knew I had been locked out, and he had done nothing. "I can't help you, Clara," Robert stammered, sweating through his suit. "Evelyn is the legal executor. If I help you, they'll ruin my practice." I didn't say a word. I simply slammed the thick manila envelope onto his pristine desk, followed by the pill bottle. "Read it," I demanded, my voice cold as ice. Robert adjusted his glasses and pulled out the real will. His face drained of all color. Then, he read the printed copy of the email draft where my dad warned him of the danger. Robert's hands began to shake uncontrollably. He looked at the pill bottle, realizing exactly what he was looking at. They killed him," Robert whispered, the cowardice vanishing, replaced by absolute legal terror. "This isn't a civil dispute, Clara. This is capital murder. Call the police," Beatrice commanded from the doorway. "The real police." Robert picked up the phone. An hour later, Detective Ramirez, a sharp, no-nonsense veteran of the Homicide Division, was sitting in the office, bagging the pill bottle as evidence. "We'll expedite the toxicology on these pills," Ramirez said, her eyes locked on mine. "If they are what you suspect, we will secure a judge's order for a secret exhumation of your father's body. But Clara, even if we prove the pills are poison, we have to prove exactly who put them in his hand." The trap was set. The storm was fully formed. And it was time to let Arthur and Evelyn walk right into it. The next 3 days were an absolute masterclass in psychological torture. I stayed at Beatrice's house, sleeping on a firm mattress in her guest room, staring at the ceiling fan spinning endlessly in the dark. Every single time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's face, pale and lifeless, and then I saw Arthur's hand coming down to strike me at the clinic. We were waiting for the state crime lab to expedite the toxicology report on the pills I had pulled from the basement drop safe. Detective Ramirez had pushed it to the top of the priority list, pulling strings with the medical examiner's office, but the justice system moves at its own agonizing, bureaucratic pace. My phone buzzed constantly, vibrating against the wooden nightstand with text messages from Arthur. He was demanding I meet them to sign the final asset transfer documents before they closed a massive commercial real estate liquidation deal. I ignored every single one of them. I let him sweat. I wanted the silence to drive him crazy. On Thursday morning, the heavy silence finally broke. Detective Ramirez called my cell phone. Her voice was flat, professional, and entirely devoid of emotion. She told Beatrice and me to come down to the downtown precinct immediately. Beatrice drove her sedan through the morning traffic, neither of us speaking a single word. We walked into the precinct, navigating a maze of sterile hallways until we reached a cramped, windowless interrogation room that smelled strongly of stale coffee and industrial floor cleaner. Ramirez walked in a moment later, holding a thin manila folder. She dropped it onto the metal table with a heavy, definitive thud. "Foxglove," Ramirez said, looking directly into my eyes without blinking. "The botanical name is digitalis. It is a highly potent cardiac glycoside. In controlled, microscopic pharmaceutical doses, it treats severe heart failure. In the massive, unrefined, completely raw doses found in that orange pill bottle you handed over, it causes a catastrophic, fatal heart attack." The pills were entirely counterfeit, pressed in an illegal mold to mimic the exact shape, scoring, and color of your father's prescribed medication. Whoever did this swapped his real medicine for a lethal dose and simply waited for him to take it with his morning coffee. It was premeditated, cold-blooded, and incredibly patient. A cold, heavy dread settled in the absolute pit of my stomach. Hearing it spoken aloud by a veteran homicide detective made it devastatingly real. My father was murdered in his own home, by the woman he had vowed to love and protect. We got the exhumation order signed by a superior court judge at midnight, Ramirez continued, crossing her arms over her badge. The county medical examiner is performing the secondary autopsy right now. We are going to find the digitalis toxins deeply embedded in his tissue samples. But Clara, here is the massive legal problem we are facing. We know they killed him, but we cannot currently prove exactly who physically put those counterfeit pills into his medicine cabinet. Arthur and Evelyn have incredibly expensive defense attorneys on retainer, paid for with your father's stolen money. Those lawyers will claim your father bought bad supplements online. They will claim a disgruntled housekeeper did it. They will create reasonable doubt. To secure a capital murder conviction that sticks, we need them to explicitly implicate themselves. We need their arrogance to blind them. We need a confession. How do we get that? I asked, my voice remarkably steady despite the hurricane of emotions inside my chest. We let them think they have completely destroyed you, Ramirez replied. She reached into a black canvas duffel bag on the floor and pulled out a complex tangle of thin wires, a microphone the size of a dime, and a small battery pack. I need you to wear a covert transmitter. I need you to set up a meeting with them to sign their paperwork. I need you to play the role of the broken, terrified, destitute daughter who is ready to surrender everything. And while you do that, you need to provoke them. Get them talking about the forged will. Get them talking about your father's failing health. We will be parked in an unmarked surveillance van right outside the building. We will be recording every single syllable. If they touch you, or if you get the confession on tape, you say a safe word, and my tactical team will immediately breach the room. I looked at the wire. I thought about the split lip Arthur had given me in public. I thought about the baby I had lost while Evelyn rolled her eyes and left me at the hospital entrance. I thought about my father, dying alone in his kitchen. I'll do it, I said without a single second of hesitation. The sting operation was scheduled for Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week after my father's funeral. I sent a short, defeated text message to Arthur. I can't fight you anymore. I'm completely broke. My landlord evicted me. I'll sign whatever you want. Just give me a small settlement to cover my outstanding medical bills. Arthur replied in less than 30 seconds. Smart girl. Corporate boardroom. 2 p.m. Do not be late, or the offer is completely off the table. At noon, a female police officer brought me into a private locker room at the precinct. She used specialized medical tape to secure the tiny microphone directly to the center of my chest, right beneath my bra strap, and secured the battery pack against the small of my back. The surgical tape pulled painfully at my bruised ribs and the healing stitches on my abdomen, but I welcomed the physical pain. It kept me intensely focused. It reminded me exactly why I was doing this. The microphone is incredibly sensitive, Ramirez instructed as she adjusted the hidden earpiece in my ear canal. You do not need to shout. Let them do the talking. Evelyn is a textbook narcissist and Arthur is a massive bully. Narcissists absolutely love to gloat when they believe they have unequivocally won. Use that psychological flaw against them. And Clara, remember your safe word. I wish Dad were here, I repeated, committing the phrase to memory. I drove my battered sedan to the massive, glass-fronted corporate headquarters of my father's real estate and construction company. It was a building he had built from the ground up, a towering symbol of his hard work and dedication to his community. I parked in the visitor lot, taking one deep, shuddering breath before stepping out into the crisp afternoon air. I slumped my shoulders forward. I let my hair fall messily around my face. I wore a wrinkled blouse and no makeup. I had to look like a woman who had completely given up on life. I walked into the grand marble lobby. The receptionist, a young woman named Sarah who had worked for my dad for 3 years, looked up from her computer monitor. She had always been sweet to me, always asking about my day, always smiling when my dad brought me into the office. But today, when she saw me, her eyes started nervously to her phone. She quickly typed a message and hit send. Clara, Sarah said, her voice tight and completely devoid of its usual warmth. They are waiting for you upstairs in the main executive boardroom. I looked at her. I really looked at her. And in that split second, the puzzle pieces fell into place. Evelyn hadn't just used a spyware app on my phone to track me to the clinic. Sarah was the rat. Sarah was the one feeding Arthur my schedule, letting him know when I visited the office, tracking my movements for a bonus paycheck. She had sold out the man who gave her a career. The betrayal stung sharply, but I filed it away in my mind. I didn't say a single word to her. I just walked past the reception desk and stepped into the elevator. The ride up to the penthouse executive suite felt like an absolute eternity. The polished metal doors slid open, and I walked down the long, thick-carpeted hallway. The framed photographs of my father cutting ribbons at construction sites, shaking hands with the mayor, and standing proudly in front of new housing developments seemed to watch me as I passed. I reached the heavy mahogany doors of the boardroom and pushed them open. Arthur was sitting at the absolute head of the massive conference table, occupying my father's custom leather chair with his expensive Italian shoes propped up on the polished wood. Evelyn was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, holding a crystal glass of sparkling water, looking out over the city skyline like a queen surveying her newly conquered kingdom. But they were not alone. Sitting to Arthur's right, actively reviewing a stack of legally binding contracts, was a man in his late 50s with slicked-back silver hair and a tailored suit. It was Marcus. The phantom landlord who had illegally evicted me from my apartment, tossed my belongings into the trash, and thrown my mother's pearls into the mud. Seeing him sitting there, casually reviewing my father's corporate assets, sent a spike of pure, unadulterated fury through my veins. Well, Arthur sneered, taking his feet off the table and leaning forward, resting his elbows on the wood. Look who finally crawled out of the gutter. You look absolutely terrible, Clara. I guess reality finally hit you hard. I'm here, I said, keeping my voice low and intentionally shaky, exactly as Detective Ramirez had instructed. I pulled out a chair at the far end of the long table and sat down, avoiding their gazes. Just give me the papers. I want this nightmare over. Have a seat, darling, Evelyn said, not even bothering to turn around from the window. We have a massive amount of paperwork for you to sign today. Marcus here has generously expedited the liquidation of the commercial real estate portfolio. We are selling the entire company, including all intellectual property and physical assets, to a foreign equity firm. You're selling it? I asked, letting genuine shock and devastation bleed into my voice. Dad spent 30 years building this company from a single pickup truck. What about the hundreds of employees? What about their families? What about their pension funds? You can't just liquidate everything. Marcus chuckled, a dry, grating, emotionless sound. He closed his leather portfolio and looked at me with utter disdain. The employees are being completely terminated on Monday morning, Clara. Severance packages have been denied due to corporate restructuring. The pension funds have already been strategically reallocated into private offshore holding accounts to maximize our exit strategy. It's just basic business. Your father was an archaic dinosaur who cared entirely too much about blue-collar workers. We are simply monetizing the assets to their fullest potential. It's stealing, I said, looking directly at Arthur. You drained the 401k accounts before he even died. You've been funneling money to a fake consulting firm in Nevada for 3 entire years. Arthur's smug, arrogant smile vanished instantly. His face tightened into a mask of aggressive, unchecked hostility. He slammed his hand flat on the table, the sound cracking like a whip. You watch your mouth, you little failure. You have absolutely zero proof of anything. Now pick up that pen and sign the non-disclosure agreement, the asset forfeiture, and the waiver of contest. If you sign it right now, my mother will authorize a measly $5,000 wire transfer to your pathetic checking account so you can go rent a cheap motel room. If you do not sign it, I swear to God, I will bury you in so much aggressive legal debt you will be paying my lawyers until the day you die. The trap was perfectly set. They were completely comfortable in their power. They were thoroughly convinced I was utterly powerless, broken, and ready to submit. I took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the cold wire taped firmly against my chest. It was time to spring the snare. I didn't reach for the gold-plated pen resting on top of the contracts. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, slowly dropping the hunched, defeated posture. I lifted my chin and looked squarely at Evelyn, who finally turned away from the panoramic window to face me, an annoyed expression crossing her perfectly contoured face. "What about the will?" I asked, my voice rising significantly in volume, projecting clearly and cleanly for the hidden microphone beneath my blouse. "The one you shoved in my face at the house while the movers were stealing his furniture. It was completely fake, wasn't it? Dad never signed that document. His signature was a shaky forgery." Arthur laughed out loud, a harsh, barking sound that echoed in the large room. He looked at Marcus and rolled his eyes dramatically. "She is entirely delusional. She just won't let it go. Sign the papers, Clara, before I lose my temper again." Evelyn slowly walked over to the long conference table. She placed her hands flat on the polished mahogany and leaned in, her eyes cold, calculating, and reptilian. "Does it really matter, Clara? Thomas is dead and buried in the ground. The result is exactly the same. The corporate assets, the real estate, the bank accounts, they all belong to me. I am the legal surviving spouse. You are nothing but a massive disappointment," he pitted. "He suspected you," I said softly, driving the psychological knife exactly where I knew it would pierce her massive, fragile ego. "He told me he thought he was being poisoned. He told me the coffee you made him tasted incredibly bitter every single morning. He knew you were a fraud." The entire room went dead silent. The low, ambient hum of the central air conditioning suddenly sounded deafening. Marcus stopped shuffling his legal papers, his hands freezing over the leather portfolio. Arthur slowly sat up straight, the arrogant smirk wiped completely from his face, replaced by a sudden flash of genuine panic. Evelyn's eyes narrowed into dangerous, lethal little slits. She walked around the edge of the table, her high heels clicking sharply on the hardwood border of the carpet, until she was standing just a few feet away from me. "You have a wildly vivid imagination, Clara. You are just as emotionally unstable and pathetic as your biological mother was. And look exactly where she ended up. Dead, penniless, and entirely forgotten." "Did you kill him, Evelyn?" I demanded, pushing her harder, staring directly into her dark eyes, needing the explicit words for the police recording. "Did you intentionally switch his heart medication? Because he wrote a letter to Robert, his attorney, just 2 days before he died. He knew you were draining the company, and he was finalizing the paperwork to cut you and Arthur out of the estate completely." Evelyn let out a sharp, genuine laugh. It was the most terrifying sound I had ever heard in my entire life. It was the sound of absolute, unchecked, proud sociopathy. She couldn't help herself. Her narcissistic need to boast about her superior intellect overwhelmed her sense of caution. "Thomas was a weak, pathetic old fool," Evelyn whispered, her voice dripping with venomous pride. "He had completely outlived his usefulness. He was going to cut off my son. He was going to take away the luxurious lifestyle I rightfully earned by putting up with his boring, blue-collar morality for 5 miserable years. We simply did what we had to do to protect our financial interests." "Our interests?" I asked, shifting my gaze quickly to Marcus. Marcus leaned back in his expensive chair, lacing his fingers together, a look of profound, untouchable superiority on his face. "Evelyn and I have been partners in every sense of the word for over a decade, Clara. Long before she ever met your gullible father. Thomas was just a highly profitable stepping stone for us. He provided the massive capital. I provided the necessary pharmaceutical connections to ensure his inevitable, natural-looking demise. It was a flawless, untraceable strategy." There it was. The massive twist that made my blood run absolute ice. Marcus wasn't just a corrupt landlord. He was Evelyn's long-term lover. They were a professional, coordinated team of black widows, targeting wealthy, isolated men, draining their accounts, and stopping their hearts when the money was secured. And Arthur was their willing, greedy, violent accomplice. "So you explicitly admit it," I said, my voice rock solid, ensuring the microphone picked up every nuance. "You orchestrated his murder for money." Evelyn straightened her posture, looking down her nose at me with absolute contempt. I admit absolutely nothing on the official record. But even if I did, who in the world would ever believe you? You are a grieving, hysterical, unemployed woman who just lost a baby and got legally evicted for drug use. We own the police in this town. We own the building you lived in. We own everything. You are completely pathetic. Now sign the documents. Arthur stood up, his massive, gym-built frame casting a dark shadow over the table. Enough games, he growled, pointing a thick, aggressive finger directly at my face. Sign the damn papers right now, Clara. Or maybe you'll have another tragic, painful accident like you did at the clinic. Only this time, I won't stop at a slap. You won't wake up in a hospital. You'll wake up at the bottom of a river. I looked at the gold-plated pen resting on the contract. I looked at Marcus, sitting there so comfortably in his stolen wealth. I looked at Evelyn, practically glowing with sociopathic pride. And then I looked directly into Arthur's violent, empty eyes. I had it. I had the explicit threat of physical violence and murder. I had the clear, undeniable admission of motive and conspiracy to commit capital murder from all three of them. I had everything I needed to burn their entire lives to the ground. I sat up completely straight. I pushed my shoulders back, shedding the victim persona entirely. I reached into the deep pocket of my slacks and pulled out the small, bright orange prescription pill bottle. I set it down on the center of the mahogany table with a sharp, definitive click. I am not signing anything, I said, my voice ringing with absolute, unbreakable authority. And I am not alone. Arthur stared at the pill bottle, his face instantly draining of all color. He recognized it immediately. What is that? I found the safe hidden behind the water heater in the basement. Arthur, I stated clearly, watching the profound realization of doom wash over his face. I found the real, notarized will that leaves this entire company to me. And I found the counterfeit digitalis pills you used to stop his heart. Evelyn gasped, stumbling backward against the thick glass window, her hand flying to her mouth in sheer, unadulterated terror. Marcus bolted upright out of his chair, knocking his expensive leather portfolio onto the floor, his eyes wide with panic. "You little bitch," Arthur roared. The polished facade of the wealthy executive vanished, replaced entirely by a violent, cornered animal. He lunged entirely across the wide mahogany table, scattering the legal contracts and shattering crystal water glasses. He grabbed me by the throat with both of his massive, hot hands, driving me violently backward into my chair. His grip was suffocating, instantly crushing my windpipe and cutting off my airway. I clawed desperately at his wrists, staring up into his murderous, enraged eyes, and I used the absolute last ounce of air in my lungs to scream the safe word directly into the microphone taped to my chest. "I wish Dad were here." Less than 3 seconds later, the heavy mahogany doors of the boardroom literally exploded inward, torn off their hinges. Wood splintered and shattered, raining down across the plush carpet. "Police. Drop it. Get on the ground now." A highly trained team of heavily armed tactical officers in black body armor poured into the room, assault rifles raised, laser sights tracking directly onto Arthur's chest and head. Detective Ramirez came in right behind them, her service weapon drawn, her face a mask of lethal determination. "Let her go right now, or I will drop you exactly where you stand," Ramirez screamed, her voice echoing like thunder in the confined space. Arthur froze. The absolute terror in his eyes was glorious to witness. He realized he was surrounded by loaded weapons. He threw his hands into the air and stumbled backward, tripping over a leather chair and crashing heavily onto the floor. I fell forward over the table, violently coughing and gasping for air, clutching my bruised, throbbing throat. 2 tactical officers immediately descended on Arthur, driving a heavy knee deep into his spine and wrenching his arms violently behind his back. The sharp, metallic sound of handcuffs ratcheting tight was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my life. "Get off me," Arthur screamed, his face pressed painfully into the carpet. "Do you know who I am? She attacked me. She planted that evidence. I want my lawyer." Evelyn tried to run. She bolted for the side door that led to the private executive suites, abandoning her son without a single second of hesitation. But Ramirez was faster. She intercepted Evelyn, grabbing her roughly by the arm and spinning her around, slamming her hard against the glass window. "Don't move a single muscle," Ramirez growled, pulling out her own set of heavy steel handcuffs. "Evelyn Vance, you are under arrest for the capital murder of Thomas Underwood, conspiracy to commit murder, and massive corporate wire fraud. You have the right to remain silent, and I highly suggest you start using it immediately." Marcus didn't even try to run. He stood completely frozen by his chair, his hands raised high in the air, his face pale and sweating profusely as an officer kicked his legs apart and locked him in irons. "Murder?" Evelyn shrieked, her perfectly styled hair falling into her face, the elegant, aristocratic mask entirely destroyed. "You have absolutely no proof. You cannot do this to me. I am a respected member of this community. We have the official toxicology report from the exhumation confirming foxglove poisoning," Ramirez said calmly, securing the cuffs tightly around her wrists. "We have the forged will. We have the counterfeit pills. And we have the high-definition wire recording of you and your lover explicitly admitting to the entire conspiracy just 60 seconds ago." Evelyn went entirely rigid. The fight drained completely out of her body. She slumped against the glass, her mouth opening and closing silently like a suffocating fish. I stood up slowly, rubbing my aching neck. My surgical stitches burned. My throat throbbed with every heartbeat. But as I looked at the three of them bound, defeated, and facing the rest of their lives in prison, a profound, overwhelming sense of lightness washed over my entire soul. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far. You're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below, so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The boardroom rapidly descended into a heavily orchestrated, professional chaos. Evidence technicians in blue latex gloves rushed into the room carrying specialized kits, immediately beginning to photograph the scene, tag the legal contracts scattered on the floor, and carefully bag the orange pill bottle as Exhibit A. Uniformed officers dragged Arthur, Evelyn, and Marcus out into the hallway, reading them their Miranda rights as they struggled. I followed them out, leaning against the wooden doorframe to watch the spectacle unfold. Dozens of corporate employees had gathered in the main corridor, peering out of their cubicles and glass offices in absolute, stunned shock. They watched as the elegant, previously untouchable Evelyn was marched toward the public elevators in handcuffs, her expensive mascara running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. They watched Arthur struggling, cursing at the officers, looking like a common, violent thug rather than a corporate executive. And they watched Marcus, the supposed wealthy investor, shuffling along with his head hung completely in shame. I walked slowly over to the front reception desk. Sarah, the receptionist who had sold me out, was standing there, trembling violently, her face the color of chalk. She looked at me, tears welling in her eyes, her hands shaking over her keyboard. "Clara, I am so sorry," Sarah stammered, her voice cracking. "Arthur threatened to fire me if I didn't cooperate. He paid me cash to tell him exactly when you were here and who you were talking to. I needed the money to pay my rent. Please, I didn't know they killed your dad." I looked at her, feeling absolutely zero pity. Integrity is expensive, and she had sold hers for pennies. "Pack your desk right now, Sarah," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent, watching lobby. "You are officially terminated for corporate espionage and acting as an accessory to massive corporate fraud. Security will escort you out of the building in exactly 5 minutes. If I ever see you near this property or my father's employees again, I will have you arrested and charged." Sarah burst into loud, ugly tears, but I had already turned my back on her. Beatrice came marching off the elevator, pushing her way past the police officers with the authority of a general. She took one look at the shattered boardroom doors, the empty chairs, and then at me, and she pulled me into a fierce, crushing hug. "You did it, kid," she whispered fiercely into my hair, her own voice thick with emotion. "You brought the whole damn house down on top of them. Your father would be incredibly proud of you today." The massive wave of adrenaline that had been sustaining me for an entire week finally crashed. My legs completely gave out beneath me, and I collapsed into one of the plush leather lobby chairs, burying my face in my hands. I didn't cry from grief this time. I cried from the sheer, overwhelming, exhausting relief of survival. The monster was dead, and the dragons were in cages. The ensuing legal trial took an entire year to prepare, and it was an absolute media circus. The local news stations ran endless, sensationalized segments on the Black Widow real estate conspiracy. I attended every single day of the proceedings, sitting directly behind the prosecutor's table, refusing to miss a single moment of their downfall. I watched as Robert, my father's attorney, took the stand. He testified under oath about the desperate, fearful email my father had sent him, admitting his own cowardice, but providing the crucial timeline. I watched Beatrice systematically shred Arthur's fraudulent accounting practices on a massive projector screen for the jury, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that he had stolen millions from the employee pension funds to fund his lavish lifestyle. And I watched the county medical examiner detail, with chilling scientific precision, exactly how the counterfeit digitalis had caused my father's heart to violently arrest. Evelyn sat at the defense table, wearing a drab, oversized prison jumpsuit, her hair graying at the roots. She stared at me with cold, unrepentant hatred. She never once showed a single ounce of remorse or shed a genuine tear. Marcus tried to cut a plea deal by flipping on Evelyn, offering to testify against her, but the wire recording I had captured in the boardroom was so utterly damning that the district attorney completely refused to negotiate. They were all going down together. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom opened and the foreman stood to read the verdicts, the room fell completely silent. You could hear a pin drop. Guilty on all counts. Murder in the first degree. Conspiracy to commit capital murder. Massive wire fraud and grand larceny. The judge did not hold back during the sentencing phase. He looked down at Evelyn from the bench with absolute, visceral disgust. "Evelyn Vance, for the calculated, predatory, and exceptionally cruel murder of your husband, a man who gave you everything, I sentence you to life in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole. You will die behind bars." The heavy wooden gavel banged down like a gunshot. Evelyn didn't even blink. She was completely dead inside, an empty shell of greed. Arthur, for his role in the embezzlement, the violent physical assault on me at the clinic, and his complicity in the murder cover-up, was sentenced to 25 years in federal lockup. Marcus received the exact same sentence. I sat in the gallery, closing my eyes and letting out a long, shuddering breath. The nightmare was officially, legally over. I walked out of the courthouse that afternoon into the bright, warm sunlight, feeling the heat on my face for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. The monsters were locked in cages, but the real work of rebuilding my life was just beginning. Taking over my father's massive real estate empire was the hardest professional challenge of my entire life. Arthur had done a massive amount of structural damage to the company's finances, hiding debt in shell companies and bleeding the operational accounts dry. But I absolutely refused to let it sink. I brought Beatrice out of retirement, offering her the position of chief financial officer and giving her a massive corner office. Together, we worked grueling 80-hour weeks. We successfully clawed back the stolen assets from Arthur's hidden offshore accounts with the help of federal regulators. We restored the employee 401k pension funds down to the very last penny, and we tracked down and rehired the workers Evelyn had callously fired to save a few bucks. I also took back my childhood home. I hired a team of contractors to completely renovate the interior, tearing out Evelyn's cold, sterile modern art and painting the walls with warm, vibrant colors that felt like a real home. I turned the dark, damp basement where I had crawled through the coal chute into a beautiful, climate-controlled wine cellar. But I explicitly told the contractors to keep the heavy steel drop safe exactly where it was, embedded in the foundation. It serves as a permanent, silent reminder of the high price of integrity and the brutal war I had fought to keep it. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, exactly 2 years after the trial concluded, I was rushing through the aisles of a local grocery store, distracted and grabbing ingredients for dinner. I turned a corner entirely too fast and crashed my shopping cart directly into someone else's. "Oh, I am so incredibly sorry," I said, reaching down to pick up a fallen box of pasta from the floor. "It's completely my fault," a deep, gentle voice replied. I looked up. Standing there in a casual sweater was Dr. Julian, the emergency room physician who had held my hand on the worst night of my entire life, the man who had treated me with such profound kindness while my own family abandoned me to bleed. He recognized me instantly. "Clara," he said, a warm, genuine smile spreading across his face. You look incredibly well. I followed the trial on the news. I am so sorry for everything you went through, but I am so incredibly glad you found justice." We stood in the pasta aisle talking for 20 minutes. He was quiet, steady, and intensely honest. We went for coffee that afternoon. Coffee turned into dinner, and dinner turned into a beautiful, healing romance. Julian didn't care about my corporate title, my bank accounts, or my father's real estate empire. He cared about my mind, my resilience, and my heart. He provided a safe harbor I never thought I would find again after my disastrous first marriage. A year later, we were married in a small, private, beautiful ceremony right in the garden of my father's estate. Beatrice was my maid of honor, wearing a sharp navy pantsuit and completely dominating the dance floor at the reception. And then, the ultimate miracle happened. At 35 years old, I found myself staring down at a plastic test stick with 2 solid pink lines. I sat on the edge of the bathtub, bursting into tears of pure terror and overwhelming joy. The trauma of my past immediately flared up, the haunting memory of the hospital room and the empty ultrasound screen. But this time, it was completely different. This time, I wasn't alone. I had Julian holding my hand every single step of the way, checking my vitals, soothing my anxieties. 9 months later, I gave birth to a perfectly healthy, screaming baby boy. We named him Thomas, after the greatest man I had ever known. When Tommy was just 2 weeks old, I bundled him up in a thick blue blanket and drove to the cemetery. It was a crisp, beautiful autumn morning. The leaves on the massive oak trees were turning brilliant shades of gold and crimson. I walked across the manicured grass until I reached my father's simple granite headstone. Thomas Underwood. Beloved father. Builder. I stood there, the cool wind rustling the leaves above me, holding my sleeping son tightly against my chest. "Hi, Dad," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. I reached out and traced the carved letters of his name. "I brought someone very important to meet you. This is little Tommy." I looked down at the grave, thinking about the absolute hell I had crawled through to get to this exact moment. I thought about the blood on the clinic floor, the broken pearls scattered in the mud, the suffocating terror of Arthur's hands around my throat, and the heavy thud of the judge's gavel. All of it had forged me into steel. I was no longer the terrified, broken woman crying in the rain. I was a mother, a CEO, and a survivor. "I did it, Dad," I said, a profound sense of peace washing over my entire body. "I saved the company. I protected your people. I put the monsters away exactly where they belong. And I am finally, truly happy." I gently laid a single white rose on the top of the granite stone. I didn't cry. There was no sadness left in me, only a deep, abiding gratitude for the strength he had passed down to me. "Rest now," I whispered into the autumn wind. "I've got it from here." I turned around and walked back down the paved path toward the car, where Julian was waiting for me with a warm smile. I didn't look back at the grave, and I didn't look back at the past. My war was finally over, and my beautiful, hard-won life was just beginning. Have you ever faced a toxic family member who tried to manipulate or destroy your boundaries? Have you ever had to fight back when you were pushed into a corner? Share your story in the comments below, because speaking your truth is the first step to taking your power back. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey.